Inside a suffocating courtroom, Sergeant Kevin Drake storms forward, his presence loud and uninvited. On his way past the defense table, he lashes out, his boots striking the silent black defendant like he owned the ground beneath him. But Adrian Cross isn't just anyone. A former Marine, his history is hidden, waiting. Then one phone call cuts through the arrogance, halting everything mid-breath. What truth could strip a cop's swagger bare in seconds, turning smugness into silence? Hit like share your thoughts and subscribe, because what happened that day in court wasn't just about one man's trial. It was about a secret so deep it could bend the entire room to its will. The first time I laid eyes on Adrian Cross, he was 39, black, broad-shouldered, built like he'd carried burdens heavier than most could imagine. His frame commanded space, but he sat in the defendant's chair like someone told too many times to hold his tongue. Plain blue shirt, weathered khakis, eyes lowered, studying wood grain. The charge was simple, disturbing the peace outside a corner store. On paper, almost laughable. But inside these walls, whispers grew into venom. Rumors painted him as dangerous, unpredictable. That's how it always happens in small towns. By the time truth arrives, lies have already been watered, taken root, and grown into monsters with teeth. Heavy courtroom doors slammed open. Sergeant Kevin Drake entered. Tall, white jawline cut like stone, his uniform pressed to perfection. Every step echoed like an announcement, his gaze locked on Adrian and never wavered. Passing the defense table, he leaned just close enough for the front row. "Did not expect you'd show," he sneered, his voice dripping contempt. Judge Eleanor Graves adjusted her glasses, white, late 50s, her lips pressed into a severe line. From the high bench, her gaze swept the room like an audit. Then it settled on Adrian, cool and unblinking. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The slight tilt of her head carried judgment sharp enough to wound. His public defender, Laura Hernandez, leaned in. "Let me handle this," she whispered, steady but tight. She felt the weight, the way the room leaned hard against them. Adrian's lips curled faintly. "You think they're here for the truth?" he murmured. The question was soft, but it carried a sharpness Laura couldn't quite answer. In the press row, rookie journalist Daniel Price sat watchful, not scribbling, watching. His pen paused when Adrian's right hand drifted almost unconsciously toward a pale scar tracing his wrist, fingers pressed there briefly before falling still. Daniel wrote one word in his notebook. Why? And when truth starts with a question, storms usually follow. A side door opened. Clerk Stephen Malloy shuffled in, arms loaded with files. Halfway to his desk, his eyes landed on Adrian. Recognition flickered across his face before he forced it away. He dropped the stack a little too loudly, papers scattering. Suddenly, even the hum of the vents felt like a drumbeat in the silence. Every sound magnified, the squeak of shoes, the groan of wooden benches, the shuffle of pages. The tension wasn't just present, it lived in every posture. People sat straighter when Adrian moved, glancing to Drake for cues, and through it all, Adrian sat in stillness, waiting like a man who knew storms break on their own time. Drake cleared his throat, leaned into the microphone, his words slick with practiced disdain. When I approached the defendant, he grew hostile, belligerent. Men like that, rules don't mean a thing. You never know when they'll explode. The words hung like poison. Everyone understood what men like that meant. Adrian clasped his hands, knuckles whitening. Laura was on her feet. "Objection, Your Honor." "There's no evidence of violence. That's prejudicial." Judge Graves didn't even look up from her notes. "Overruled." Laura sat down slowly, lips pressed thin. "For the record," she whispered under her breath, promising Adrian they wouldn't let this go unanswered. He gave no reply, but his silence spoke. Drake kept weaving his tale, spinning Adrian into a caricature, erratic, threatening, painted with the brush of criminality. The truth that Adrian had simply stood in line to buy coffee never entered his testimony. When Drake finally stepped down, he didn't take the nearest path. He circled by the defense table, muttering low, "Look at me when I talk." Adrian didn't move. He inhaled, counted 4, exhaled, counted 4 again. Discipline, hardened over years. Laura whispered, "Ignore him." But Drake wasn't done. His boot snapped out under the table, sharp and fast, connecting with Adrian's shin. The sound wasn't loud, but the shock was. A woman in the gallery gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The bailiff barked, stepping forward. Laura leapt up, her voice cutting through. "Your Honor, the officer just assaulted my client in open court." Judge Graves' tone sliced the air. "Sit down, or I'll clear this room." Laura stood her ground. "Let the record show." Graves interrupted. "The record shows what I say it shows." "Move on." From the press row, Daniel's camera clicked twice. He caught it perfectly. Drake's smug smirk against Adrian's carved stillness. He thumbed his phone, typing beneath the photo. Assault. In open court. Adrian's hand drifted again toward the pale seam of his scar, but stilled. Not here. Not now. He lifted his gaze, locking on Drake, calm cutting deep. Drake faltered, the grin slipping. He looked like a man who'd just heard a branch snap in the dark. Laura leaned close. "We'll file it, properly." Adrian gave the faintest nod. Judge Graves tapped her pen twice, then rose. "We'll recess." The benches exhaled in creaks, conversations igniting in whispers, but a line had been crossed. 10 minutes later, the room filled again. Drake swaggered back, lounging in the witness chair as if it were his living room. "As I was saying," he began, picking up seamlessly, "the defendant was combative from the start," raised his voice. "Got in my face. People like him. Escalation is in their blood." His smirk flicked toward Adrian. A couple in the gallery snorted, shaking their heads. Laura shot a warning look over her shoulder before rising. "Objection. Character assassination, not fact." Judge Graves barely glancing up. "Overruled." Her voice colder now, less hidden. Laura lingered, standing, frustration pulsing. "Your Honor, I have a witness." Mr. Cross was helping an elderly woman at... Graves cut her off. "Not relevant," Graves snapped, waving a hand dismissively. "This case is about what happened afterward." Laura's breath hissed through her nose. She sat, frustration radiating. Adrian didn't break stillness, but the muscle along his jaw twitched. A clerk shuffled files, one slipping loose, fluttering down by Adrian's feet. Instinct took over. Adrian scooped it up in one motion. The move was too quick, too precise, military precise. Daniel's camera lowered slightly, his eyes narrowing. That wasn't just reflex, that was training. Drake noticed too, his lip curled. "Not so tough now, huh?" he muttered from the stand. Adrian met his stare, silent, steady, and sometimes silence is louder than words. Drake couldn't quite shake it off. Daniel tapped his notebook, troubled. The story Drake spun didn't match the incident logs Daniel had reviewed earlier. His words were bloated, vague, convenient, fabricated. Daniel leaned to a reporter nearby. "You catch that?" "Timeline's off." The other journalist only shrugged, typing. Near the back, Clerk Malloy slipped out quietly, his phone already pressed to his ear. In the hallway, Malloy's voice dropped. "Yeah, it's him. I just saw him. No, I'm not guessing. I know. You'd better get here fast inside." Drake kept tightening the knife of his lies, piling exaggeration upon exaggeration. Adrian's temple ticked with tension, but his body never shifted. Laura's pen slowed. She was listening for cracks in the story. Daniel's attention darted between Drake, Adrian, and his own notes. Patterns were forming. Something was wrong, and he could feel it. The courtroom's silence thickened until it was broken by the sharp ring of the clerk's desk phone. The sound sliced the air. Heads turned. In this room, every sound carried weight, and this one cut deep. The clerk, an older woman with glasses low on her nose, lifted the receiver. "Superior Court Clerk's Office." She listened briefly, then froze. Her eyes flicked straight to Adrian. Her posture stiffened. Color drained slightly from her face. "Yes, one moment." She cupped the receiver, turning toward the bench. "Your Honor, an urgent call. They're asking for you by name." That changed the air. People shifted in their seats. Judge Graves frowned, skeptical. "This is a court proceeding. Tell them I'm unavailable." The clerk shook her head slightly, interrupting, something no one ever dared. "They insist." "It's urgent." Graves' tone sharpened. "Who?" The clerk's eyes didn't move from Adrian. "They said the Department of Defense. And they mentioned the defendants." A ripple went through the gallery like a dropped stone. Laura's pen paused mid-stroke. Even Drake's smirk faltered. Adrian remained motionless, though his scarred wrist twitched once. Graves reached for the phone deliberately, her movements slow, calculated, projecting control. She pressed the receiver to her ear. "This is Judge Graves," she said, voice crisp, authoritative, unyielding. Silence followed. Everyone leaned forward unconsciously, caught in the weight of the moment. A name tied to the Department of Defense wasn't something tossed casually into a courtroom. Laura straightened, her eyes darting to Adrian, questions forming she didn't dare voice. Daniel's camera hung forgotten at his chest. Whatever this was, it was bigger than all of them. The clerk stood still, knuckles white around her pen. Drake shifted, clearing his throat, trying to reassert dominance, but it was too late. The swagger had cracked, a fracture visible in his posture. He glanced toward Adrian, no longer with mockery, but with unease. For the first time, Sergeant Kevin Drake seemed unsure of the ground beneath him. The gallery whispered. The walls themselves seemed to hold their breath. Adrian sat silent, but the calm around him felt dangerous now, measured, waiting. Laura leaned in, whispering, "What is this?" Adrian didn't answer. He only kept his gaze steady, locked on the table, as if he already knew what was about to unfold, and chose patience instead. Daniel's notes trembled under his pen. This wasn't just a trial anymore. It was something else, something far heavier. The room seemed smaller, compressed, and when Judge Graves finally spoke into the receiver, the pause before her words dragged like chains. "This is Judge Graves," she repeated, her tone commanding, but shadowed now by an edge of caution. The receiver buzzed faintly with voices only she could hear. Her brows furrowed deeper. "Yes," she said slowly, measured. "One moment, please." Covering the phone with her hand, she looked directly at Adrian Cross, her eyes sharper than before. "They insist," she said flatly, "and they mentioned you by name." The room shifted again, breathless and waiting. Whispers flared in the gallery, racing like wildfire. Laura stiffened. Daniel's pulse quickened, his fingers flying across his notepad. Drake sat rigid, a bead of sweat forming at his temple despite his forced smirk. Judge Graves inhaled deliberately, steeling herself. Then slow and deliberate, she lifted the phone again. "This is Judge Graves," she said firmly. "Superior Court, Department of Defense on the line." The clerk whispered like a prayer. The gallery fell utterly still, silence heavier than steel. Every eye turned toward the defendant, and in that moment, Adrian Cross finally raised his head, his calm gaze settling across the room like a storm on the horizon, silent but unstoppable. The courtroom held its breath, the only sound the buzz of tired fluorescent lights overhead. Judge Eleanor Graves kept her face even, but her eyes flickered as the voice on the line went on. Her grip shifted on the receiver. "Are you certain?" she asked, her tone quieter now, strained. Her gaze snapped toward Adrian Cross. He hadn't moved, but something about the way he sat seemed altered, coiled almost. "Yes," Graves said into the phone. "Yes, I understand. No, he hasn't." She cut herself short, lips compressing. "I see. We'll comply with that request." The room tensed like stretched wire. When she set the phone down, silence pressed in heavy. Drake folded his arms, chuckling low, dismissive. "What's next?" he muttered. "Flying saucers outside." Laura Hernandez's glare could have carved him open, but he ignored it. Graves rose, authority snapping back into her voice like a whip. "Court is recessed. Now!" The bailiff hesitated. "But your honor, we still have—" "Now," Graves repeated, heavier. Benches screeched as people rose. Confusion and curiosity thickened the air. Daniel Price leaned toward Laura. "That wasn't just any call." She didn't answer, her eyes locked on Adrian. At the far end, Clerk Stephen Malloy slipped toward the exit. Malloy already had his phone in hand, thumbs moving quick, his hesitation only long enough to confirm before he hit send. On his screen, 3 words: "They're coming now." Whispers travel faster than facts. Within 5 minutes, rumors crawled through the hallways like smoke, curling into every corner, warping truth as they spread. "Did you hear?" Someone near the water cooler whispered, pitched low but loud enough to carry. "They say he was military." Heads turned, glances sliding toward Adrian, who leaned against the wall, hands clasped loosely, his stillness commanding. He didn't move, didn't flinch, while speculation swirled like storm clouds around him. Drake lounged against a marble column, smirk tugging at his lips. "If he's some war hero," he drawled, voice carrying just far enough, "then I'm the governor of this state." His cronies snickered, sharp bursts of laughter cracking through the hallway, brittle like breaking glass. He basked in it, arrogant, unshaken. Laura's heels clicked a staccato rhythm as she approached Adrian. "They're whispering about you," she murmured, tilting her head toward the crowd. "Is any of it true?" Adrian's eyes didn't meet hers. They fixed instead on a distant point down the corridor. "It's complicated," he said softly, words edged to close a door. She studied him, reading the tight line of his jaw, the weight in his silence. Before she could press, Malloy reappeared. He leaned close, his voice quiet, almost conspiratorial. "I made a call," he murmured. His tone carried inevitability, the sound of wheels already turning. Laura blinked, unsettled. "What call?" Malloy was already gone. Off to the side, Daniel crouched over his camera. On his screen, the image was damning. Drake's boot slamming into Adrian's leg, frozen proof of assault in open court. He typed furiously. Headline forming in his mind. "Deputy attacks defendant during trial." His thumb hovered. Over send. The photo could detonate everything. "This goes live in minutes," Daniel muttered, pulse steady but jaw tight. He knew this image could blow the lid off or drag the whole town into chaos. Adrian shifted slightly, gaze cutting down the hall as though he sensed something before anyone else. A ripple of tension passed through him, subtle. Then the glass doors swung wide, spilling sunlight across the corridor. A man stepped in, no uniform, just pressed slacks, a jacket fitted too perfectly. His eyes swept the hallway, sharp, deliberate, until they landed on Adrian. For a breath, his stride faltered, his spine straightening in recognition, the kind between men forged in silence. Adrian's brow lifted barely, a flicker crossing his face. The stranger dipped his chin, almost imperceptible, before vanishing into a side hall. The entire exchange lasted seconds, but Laura saw it, Daniel too. Even Drake noticed, though he hid it under another crooked grin, mocking as always. "What was that?" Laura whispered. Adrian exhaled. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. Laura could hear it in his voice, steadier now, anchored. Whatever passed in that brief exchange had settled him. The air thickened. Conversation stumbled, replaced by footsteps echoing hard against marble. A clerk's typewriter rattled faintly from some distant office. A jarring soundtrack to the gathering storm. Daniel slipped his phone away, eyes still locked on Adrian. "Your story's about to be everywhere," he said. Adrian didn't answer, but his silence wasn't emptiness. It was chosen, deliberate. Silence that draws people in, forcing them to fill the gaps with their own fears, their own imagination of what was coming next. Restless, Drake pushed off the wall, swagger in every step. "So, Marine, huh?" he sneered, voice loud enough for the crowd. Or was it summer camp where they taught you how to look tough and stand still? Adrian's gaze rose slow, deliberate, locking with his. No words, just a stare so steady it bent the air. The stare stretched taut until the bailiff's voice cut through from the double doors. Court resumes in 5 minutes. Laura's pulse jumped. Malloy typed something quick into his phone at the far end. Daniel shifted, restless, his camera in hand. Adrian stood at the center of it all, stillness that drew gravity around him. Drake, however, wasn't done. He slipped through a side door, disappearing with a predator's stride. He didn't wander. He had a destination. I caught the edge of his posture, saw where he went, to graves. They spoke tucked in an alcove by chambers, his voice low, sharp, gesturing like Adrian was a live explosive. Men like that, Drake said, his voice pitched for urgency, you don't drag it out. The longer he's here, the more chance something blows. Let's cut the charade and process him. Graves didn't agree outright, but she didn't push back either. Her silence wasn't consent, but it was space. Space Drake knew how to use. That space was permission without ink. Back in the hallway, Laura's phone buzzed. She stepped aside, reading the message with a frown. No name, no number, just 5 words. They're coming. Hold steady. Her pulse spiked. She looked at Adrian, who still stood calm, arms loose at his sides, expression unreadable still. She kept the message to herself. Drake returned, prowling back in like a man who thought steel bent, if you pressed hard enough. He stopped close, his breath invading Adrian's space. Figures, he muttered, venom-laced. Another loudmouthed black man, thinking the world owes him. Let me tell you, boy. The gallery stiffened. One man in the seats leaned forward, ready to intervene. Adrian didn't move, didn't blink. Drake leaned closer. People like you end up in chains or in the dirt. The air shifted, charged, the kind of silence before a lightning strike. Drake wanted an explosion. Adrian only tilted his head, speaking steady, almost gentle. Your time's nearly done. Not a threat, a statement, said like someone who already knew how the minutes ahead would unfold. Drake's smirk slipped, the mask cracking for half a second before he scoffed, stepping back. Laura caught it, Daniel too, and maybe even Graves, her frown etched deeper than before. The bailiff called everyone back. Chairs scraped, echoes bouncing off paneled walls. Laura sat, still replaying that anonymous text in her mind. They're coming. Daniel lifted his camera, steady again, ready. Malloy slid into his seat, thumb darting across his phone like sending coordinates. Adrian settled back into his chair, calm as a tide. Drake lingered, standing, searching for some angle to reclaim control. But whatever edge he thought he held was fraying fast, because something had shifted. The room no longer carried tension alone. It hummed with expectation. People didn't know why, but they knew. And Adrian, he wasn't just expecting it, he was waiting. Then came a sound most in that courthouse had never heard. The low growl of a military SUV idling just beyond the gates. At first, no one cared. Trials had recessed noise, but then the sharp clack of doors opening, then the synchronized thud of boots on pavement, too sharp for courthouse guards. Eyes turned toward tall windows. Even Graves leaned slightly, curiosity betraying her composure. The courthouse doors burst open. 4 men strode in, not local police blues, but deep navy uniforms, gold insignia gleaming. Their pace was steady, sweeping eyes scanning the room like scanners. They weren't here to watch. They were here to act. Laura's breath caught. Daniel lowered his camera for the first time that day. Drake moved first, stepping into their path, hand raised like authority belonged to him. You can't just storm in here, he barked, his voice echoing harder than intended. The leader didn't slow. He brushed past Drake as if he were smoke. His gaze locked forward, unbroken. Drake's arm, raised in defiance, hung useless, ignored. The other men followed in step, eyes like blades cutting across the courtroom. The gallery murmured, unsettled. Laura clutched her pen tighter. Daniel's pulse hammered. And Adrian, he only watched, the calm in his eyes unshaken, steady as a storm contained. Malloy sat near the back, his phone clutched tight, thumb pressing once more like confirming a signal. Graves straightened on the bench, eyes narrowing. The uniforms weren't ceremonial, they carried weight. A shift rippled through the gallery, fear and awe in equal measure. Drake seethed, his authority unraveling thread by thread in real time. The anticipation thickened, heavy in the air. People didn't just sense something. They felt it pressing down on their chests. Even those blind to context knew. Something irreversible was beginning. Adrian didn't fidget. He didn't flinch. He simply waited, the calm at the heart of an oncoming storm, silence sharper than any spoken word. The growl of the SUV engines lingered outside. Inside, boots echoed against courthouse tile, measured, deliberate. They weren't rushing. They weren't wandering. Every step was chosen. The uniforms gleamed under fluorescent lights, gold insignia flashing like fire. The gallery sat frozen, caught between dread and awe, while Adrian's eyes followed, steady, knowing. Judge Graves leaned forward slightly, straining for a glimpse. The gallery stirred, and then, without hesitation, the front doors crashed wider. The four men entered fully, presence filling the room. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Their movements, their discipline, carried a message more powerful than words. They were here for him. The weight of their presence bent the air. Laura swallowed hard. Daniel's camera lowered again. Forgotten. Drake barked loud, desperation creeping. "You can't just march in here!" His protest rang hollow, echoing more than intended. The lead man's pace never faltered. He brushed past Drake's outstretched arm, dismissing him entirely, eyes fixed on Adrian Cross. The others swept in behind, silent, precise. Their eyes scanned every corner, but their focus converged. The gallery exhaled in one collective gasp. Laura clutched her notebook to her chest. Daniel whispered, "Oh my God." And Adrian finally lifted his chin, calm gaze steady, as if everything was happening exactly as he'd known it would. That's when I saw him, the one face no one would forget. Admiral Nathan Rourke, even without a uniform, he'd command any room, but in full dress whites, ribbons gleaming, jaw set like carved granite, there was no mistaking him. His voice rang out, clean and deadly precise, like a well-aimed shot. "Where is Adrian Cross?" The gallery froze. You could feel the question take shape. Why is a four-star admiral asking for a man on trial? Adrian didn't twitch. He let the silence settle on everyone else first. Then, unhurried, he rose to his feet, quiet as a verdict. His eyes found Rourke's, and everything else fell away. No judge, no jury, no Drake. Just recognition passing between two men who knew precisely who stood before them. Rourke's expression shifted, barely, into something rare on a man like him. Regard, not polite, earned. Forged far from varnished wood and ceremonial gavels. Adrian, older than he looked, 40 now, offered a single nod. Rourke returned it, no handshake, no theatrics. They didn't need them. That was the moment the room truly rerouted. You could feel an invisible ripple glide from the first row to the back wall, changing the current underneath every breath. Even the clueless sensed the balance had just tipped, and not toward Deputy Drake. Judge Eleanor Graves cleared her throat, the sound oddly tight. "Admiral Rourke, this is—" "I know exactly where I am, Judge," Rourke said, eyes never leaving Adrian. "And I'm not here to perform politics." The sentence landed like steel. "What is happening?" someone whispered. Another voice, hushed but stubborn. "Told you he wasn't just some guy." Drake tried again, chin lifted. "Sir, with respect." Rourke turned only slightly, catching Drake's gaze. The words died in Drake's throat, not a glare. Worse, the calm, measured look of a man unimpressed by bluster. Laura Hernandez glanced sideways at Stephen Malloy, who watched like a gambler cashing a long-held ticket. Malloy's phone lit, a message pulsing. They're here. Outside, another SUV door thumped shut. More steps approached, measured, unhurried. Inside, nobody shifted. The room held its breath the way a field holds frost at dawn. Whether they grasped the specifics or not, everyone understood one fact. Something enormous had arrived, and it would redraw the lines. Adrian didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He stood steady, as if this exact sequence of moments had been written long ago. For once, Drake wasn't directing the scene anymore. The tension from Rourke's entrance hung like thunder waiting to break. Without asking permission, he advanced, each step landing with a gravity that straightened spines. At the bench, he set down a flat leather case. The sound was soft, but it struck like a small hammer on a large bell. "Your Honor," Rourke said, voice firm with command, "this must be entered into the record immediately." Graves eyed the case, suspicion flickering. "And what exactly is this?" "Declassified hours ago," Rourke replied, holding her gaze. "Department of Defense authorization. For you and you alone." The room's oxygen seemed to thin. Graves hesitated, glancing toward Drake for invisible support. Curiosity or unease carried her forward. She opened the folder. At first, nothing. Then the mask slipped. Line by line, her mouth parted, brows drew down, a faint tremor traveling to the hand holding the page. She swallowed once, harshly audible in the hush. Rourke turned to the gallery, voice filling corners like floodlight. "You've been told this man is merely the defendant, Adrian Cross. That's not the whole truth." The benches tilted forward in near unison. Drake folded his arms, feigning boredom. Jaw clenched. "Adrian Cross," Rourke continued, "is a decorated Marine raider. He led one of the most perilous hostage rescues in recent memory, operations spanning 3 nations, deep inside hostile ground. He deployed with 6 men. He returned with every hostage alive, 23 souls, not one left behind." A sharp gasp burst from the back. Laura's fingers whitened around the pew edge. Daniel Price's camera trembled against his grip. "Most of you never heard of it," Rourke said, "because the record was sealed, erased publicly to protect him from the people still hunting him. He isn't simply a veteran. He is still serving this country in ways most can't begin to imagine." The room swayed. Graves's eyes darted between the file and Adrian, then back to the seal on the letterhead. "And now," Rourke went on, "Adrian Cross is a protected witness in a federal investigation tied to national security. His safety isn't a courtesy, it's statutory. Any harm against him is a federal offense." Drake's smirk collapsed, color drained from his face, because that kick under the table wasn't just misconduct anymore. It was assaulting a federally protected witness in front of cameras and a judge. Careers end that way. Futures do too. On the bench, Graves's gavel hand twitched, then pressed flat. "Admiral, are you saying—" "I'm saying," Rourke cut in, blade sharp, "the Department of Defense is fully apprised of today's treatment of Mr. Cross. I will personally ensure every action is referred to the U.S. Attorney's Office. This ends now." The gallery erupted in whispers, like sparks chasing dry grass. Malloy sank back, a small, knowing smile ghosting his lips, as if he'd been counting down to this hour for months. Laura turned to Adrian, eyes wide with a question she didn't voice. He didn't move, composed as stone, something bright and hard flickering behind the calm. Drake muttered, "This is absurd." Adrian's head turned, slow and precise. "Told you," he said softly, his voice carrying anyway. "Your time's nearly done." It was not a threat. It was an observation, spoken the way pilots describe altitude. For once, Drake had nothing ready. He swallowed and looked away, fury clamping his jaw. Daniel's phone buzzed. He typed fast. "We have a blockbuster. Publish now." Up front, Rourke squared the folder as if aligning a sight. "We're not here to derail justice, Your Honor," he said evenly. "We're here to ensure it actually occurs." No one argued. No one dared inhale too loudly. In the center of it all, Adrian Cross, once another defendant in cuffs, stood as the eye of a hurricane that had inverted the entire room. It happened so quickly most missed the first clue, the synchronized thud of boots on tile. Two military police entered, brass catching fluorescent light like sparks. One MP held a folded document, sealed in red. They didn't wait for permission. They crossed to Rourke and handed it over. He faced Judge Graves, voice steady, but cutting clean. Your Honor, by order of the United States Department of Justice, we are here to execute an arrest warrant for Deputy Kevin Drake. He let it hang a heartbeat, long enough for every neck to pivot toward the deputy, for assaulting a federally protected witness. The words cracked like a gunshot. Drake blinked, like reality had misfired. He scoffed, stepping back. You've got to be kidding. The MPs didn't blink. Sir, stand up. I'm not going anywhere, Drake snapped, voice rising. You don't come into my court. This isn't your court, Rourke said, lower, colder. It belongs to the people. You violated the oath you swore. The MPs moved. Drake yanked his arm, but they were quicker. A wrist, a shoulder, then the metallic click of cuffs. Gasps rippled like a wind through wheat. Laura's hand flew to her mouth. Malloy leaned forward, eyebrows high, astonished that the world, for once, aligned with the rules. On the bench, Graves stared at the wood grain, fingers digging into the edge. Drake twisted, face flushed, spitting. You can't. I'll bury. Adrian stood. His chair's soft drag was the only sound. He turned to Drake, met his eyes with a calm that felt dangerous. You thought you lived above the law, he said, each word measured, final. Turns out the law was always so above you. The line closed like a coffin lid. The lights hummed faintly. No one spoke. Drake froze long enough for everyone to witness recognition break across his face. Then the MPs guided him toward the doors. His boots scraped like they were being pulled by gravity he couldn't fight. The heavy doors shut, and the room's silence changed temperature. Graves glanced at Adrian, but said nothing. He lowered his eyes, letting the weight of a different future settle. The gavel remained untouched. Behind him, Laura exhaled, a careful, contained smile finding the corner of her mouth. The quiet satisfaction of watching the first real stone of justice finally drop. Adrian sat again, something like the ghost of a smile tugging, then vanishing. The storm had shifted tracks, and every person present knew the case could never return to what it had been. The courtroom doors swung wide, and the hallway outside detonated into bright lights and overlapping voices. Reporters surged, questions colliding midair. Mr. Cross, a statement? Were you Marine raiders? Was Deputy Drake targeting you because you're black? Camera shutters hammered in frantic bursts, flashes strobing across Adrian's face. The air tasted of hot bulbs, paper dust, and bitter courthouse coffee, everything electric and too close together. Adrian didn't rush. He walked forward with deliberate steps. Admiral Rourke stayed a half-pace behind, authority quiet and immovable. Adrian didn't shield his eyes, didn't duck his head. He offered a small, steady smile, not triumph, but resolve, the kind you keep when you're halfway through a mission, not at the end. A young reporter thrust a mic close. What do you want people to remember from today? Adrian paused, gaze moving over faces, notepads poised, phones recording, eyes waiting to be told what this meant. That doing the right thing, he said quietly, is rarely easy, but it's always necessary. He didn't linger. Rourke guided him through the crush. MPs opened a narrow lane toward a black SUV idling at the curb, engine patient. The rear door swung wide. Adrian climbed in first, Rourke following, shutting it with a solid, decisive thud that seemed to seal the noise outside, like a lid on boiling water. From the steps, Daniel stood with his laptop bag hanging off one shoulder. He'd stayed quiet through the frenzy, eyes on the SUV as it eased away. On his screen, the headline draft still glowed. He didn't type. He closed the lid softly, almost ceremonial, thinking, this isn't just a story, it's a turning. It's a reminder. The SUV eased into traffic, blending with the rhythm of the city. Inside, Admiral Rourke leaned back, gaze fixed forward, while Adrian Cross turned toward the glass. Outside, the afternoon light stretched long across steel and stone, the world carrying on, unaware of what had shifted behind courthouse walls. His reflection stared back, older than the photos from his Marine days, lined by time, not weaker but tempered. Beyond his own image, he watched lives moving untouched by the storm he'd weathered, strangers laughing, walking, oblivious. Maybe that was how it should be. He didn't crave applause. Headlines weren't the point. What mattered was simple. Today, justice had found daylight. The SUV curved around the corner, the courthouse vanishing from view like a chapter closed. With the low hum of the engine and the pulse of the city filtering through, Adrian let go of a breath he hadn't noticed he'd been holding. Justice, he thought, isn't bound by ink or statute. It lives in those willing to risk everything to protect what's right. Not every story is about what occurred. It's about what lingers after. Today proved that justice isn't just about codes and courtrooms. It's about courage, honesty, and the unshakable will to stand firm when the world pushes hardest. That's the measure of truth, not just spoken, but carried. If this story resonated with you, take a moment, tap that like button, share it with someone who needs strength, and subscribe to Legacy Tales for more accounts that matter. Your support isn't just numbers on a screen. It's the reason we can continue telling stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us what we stand for. At Legacy Tales, we believe every voice matters, every truth deserves its day, and every listener is part of the journey. That's our pledge, our signature. And with you here, that mark doesn't fade, it endures. Together we carry it forward, one story at a time. The SUV's tires hummed against the pavement, carrying Adrian Cross away from the courthouse that had nearly buried him. Admiral Nathan Rourke sat beside him, posture sharp even in repose, eyes fixed ahead, as if the road itself were another battlefield. Adrian turned to the glass, watching the city blur into streaks of afternoon light, gray concrete and golden sun tangled together like memory and present colliding. His reflection stared back, older than the man frozen in his Marine photographs, his face carved by years of silence and things left unspoken. The scar on his wrist caught the sunlight. For a moment, it looked like fresh steel. People outside carried on unaware, walking dogs, carrying groceries, laughing into phones. They didn't know what had shifted in the courthouse. They didn't know a deputy had been dragged out in cuffs, or that the Department of Defense had stepped into a small-town trial. And maybe they didn't need to. Justice, Adrian thought, wasn't meant for spectacle. It lived in the quiet persistence of people willing to pay the price of truth. He let out a slow breath, one he hadn't realized he'd been holding since dawn. Rowan glanced at him. "You handled yourself well in there." Adrian didn't look away from the window. "I did nothing. You did exactly what you had to." Sometimes restraint is the sharpest blade. Adrian's silence lingered, but Rowan knew what sat behind it. The years of missions that left marks no court record could show. The names of men who hadn't come back, the secrets still classified, stamped into files that could never see daylight. The SUV turned, courthouse vanishing in the rear view. For a heartbeat, it felt like closure. But closure never came that easy. Outside the courthouse, chaos reigned. Reporters swarmed the steps, voices colliding, microphones shoved at every passerby. Some cheered, waving flags and shouting Adrian's name. Others sneered, holding signs calling him dangerous, criminal, untrustworthy. "Marine or murderer," one headline already screamed from a phone screen. Inside the courthouse, Judge Graves sat at her bench long after the gallery had emptied. The gavel lay untouched beside her, but her fingers hovered over it, twitching. She had worn the robe for 3 decades, through noise and anger and scandal, but today had cracked something she hadn't known was fragile. She had let Drake run wild. She had dismissed objections she knew had weight, And now the Admiral had forced her courtroom into the national spotlight. Her reflection stared back from the polished bench, older, worn, lips pressed thin. What would history write about her after this? Complicit? Corrupt? Or simply coward? The thought made her chest tighten. Daniel Price sat cross-legged on the courthouse steps, laptop balanced precariously on his knees. His editor's voice still buzzed in his ear. "This is front page, Daniel. Don't waste it." But Daniel hesitated. He had the photo, Drake's boot colliding with Adrian's shin, Adrian's calm stare piercing the moment. It would explode across the internet in seconds, yet something gnawed at him. The story wasn't just about a corrupt deputy. It wasn't even about a trial gone sideways. It was about Adrian. And Daniel didn't know if exposing him further was justice or another kind of weapon. He closed the laptop for a moment, pressing his palms against the cool metal. Around him, chants clashed. Hero from one side, dangerous from the other. The noise seeped into his skin like poison. Truth had always been simple to Daniel. Today it felt like quicksand. Deputy Kevin Drake sat cuffed in the back of another vehicle, jaw tight, eyes burning holes through the partition glass. The MPs on either side didn't flinch, didn't glance his way. They didn't need to. Drake wasn't just furious, he was terrified. Not of prison, not of charges, of exposure. Adrian Cross wasn't the only one with secrets buried in classified files. Drake had been useful to men higher up, men who didn't want their deals traced, men who needed a deputy willing to twist reports, plant stories, disappear evidence. And if Adrian testified, if Rowan made this more than just a courtroom scandal, Drake's jaw clenched harder. He couldn't let it happen. He wouldn't. Somewhere in the city, he still had allies. The SUV carrying Adrian pulled into a quiet garage beneath a federal building. The MPs escorted Rowan and Adrian inside, their boots ringing sharp against concrete. Fluorescent lights hummed above, sterile and cold. "This way," Rowan said, guiding Adrian toward a secure elevator. The doors slid shut. For the first time that day, they were alone. "Why now?" Adrian asked finally, voice low. "You've kept me buried for years. Why pull me back into the open?" Rowan studied him. His eyes were tired, but still cut like steel. "Because the rot is spreading. And because men like Drake are only the front line of something bigger, we can't keep you in the shadows anymore." Adrian's jaw tightened. "You're making me a target again." "You were always a target," Rowan replied. "The difference is, this time, you'll be ready." Flashback. Adrian was younger, maybe 30. The desert air baked against his skin as he and his team crouched outside a crumbling compound. His hand drifted to the scar on his wrist, still raw then. The mission was simple on paper: rescue hostages. In reality, nothing about it was simple. The door blasted open, chaos erupted, gunfire, shouts in a language that still echoed in his nightmares. 6 men had gone in, every hostage came out. 23 souls, but Adrian still remembered the face of Sergeant Mark Ellis, his closest friend, who'd taken the bullet meant for him. He still remembered carrying Ellis's body out, refusing to leave him behind. That was the day he'd learned survival came with its own wounds. The elevator chimed, snapping him back. They stepped into a secured floor where federal agents waited, folders stacked high, screens flickering with live feeds. Laura Hernandez was already there, arms folded, eyes sharp. "Glad you're safe," she said, though her voice carried an edge. "But you need to understand, this trial was only the beginning. The state's attorney is furious. The press is circling like sharks. And Drake? He's not done fighting." Rowan nodded. "He'll try to spin it. That's what snakes do." Laura looked at Adrian. "They'll go after you harder than ever. If you testify, they'll paint you as unstable, dangerous, and some people will believe it." Adrian met her eyes calmly. "Then we give them something else to believe." Outside, the protests swelled. Reporters broadcast live. Social media churned. Hashtags trended. Burke hero or threat. Adrian Cross. Justice on trial. Drake's allies began leaking rumors. Claims of civilian deaths overseas. whispers of classified missions gone wrong. None of it verified, but verification didn't matter in the storm. Daniel watched the feeds from a diner across the street, coffee growing cold beside him. His phone buzzed with messages. Where's the follow-up? Post the photo. Publish the headline. But Daniel couldn't shake the moment in court, the calm in Adrian's eyes, the weight in Rowan's words. Was it possible the truth was bigger than the clicks his editor demanded? He closed his laptop again. Maybe some truths required more than headlines. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit office miles away, a man in a tailored suit ended a phone call with a clipped response. Cross has resurfaced. Handle it. He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid catching the city lights. He had no intention of letting a Marine with too much honor unravel years of work. Outside, sirens wailed. Inside, he smiled thinly. The war wasn't over. It was only changing battlefields. The protests outside the courthouse didn't fade with the evening sun. They grew. By nightfall, the steps were clogged with people chanting, cameras rolling, signs waving under the flickering glow of street lamps. Some carried flags and shouted Adrian's name like he was a legend. Others spat his name like a curse, two factions divided by one man's silence. Inside the secure building, Adrian sat across from Laura Hernandez, who flipped through a thick folder of documents. Her expression was tight, her eyes darting between the paperwork and the TV screen mounted on the wall. Every channel had the same headline in bold, Navy Hero or National Risk. Beside her, Admiral Rourke's jaw tightened. They'll try to bury him under noise, he said. Laura glanced at Adrian. And some of it's already working. Anonymous leaks, files showing up in inboxes that don't exist on record. Someone is pushing hard to smear you. Adrian leaned back, arms crossed loosely. They always have. The only difference now is that people are watching across town. Kevin Drake sat in a holding cell, staring at the cinder block wall with a fury that scorched the air. His arrest had been humiliating, but worse than humiliation was irrelevance. He could already feel control slipping from his grip, headlines shaping him into the villain. He wouldn't let it stick. A guard passed by. Drake leaned forward, lowering his voice. Call Sheriff Dalton. Tell him it's time. The guard hesitated, then nodded. Drake smiled, a thin, bitter line. Allies in the sheriff's office still owed him favors, and if Adrian thought one set of handcuffs ended the fight, he was a fool. Back in the secure suite, Rowan placed a sealed folder on the table in front of Adrian. It's time you saw it, he said. Adrian eyed the folder without moving. I know what's in there. You know your scars. But you don't know how far the ripples went. Rowan pushed the folder closer. Read it. Laura leaned in, watching. Adrian exhaled slowly, then opened it. Inside were pages stamped with the familiar black bars of redaction, reports, mission logs, photographs blurred by official censorship. But one page caught his eye, a list of names. Among them, Sergeant Mark Ellis, his closest friend, his brother, in all but blood. Next to Ellis's name, status, deceased. Operation Ravenfall. Adrian's jaw tightened, his scarred wrist twitching slightly. He flipped another page, a blurred satellite image of a compound. Beneath it, a single line of text. Hostage extraction successful, 23 recovered alive. He remembered every face. He remembered carrying Ellis's body, refusing to leave him behind, but the file didn't mention Ellis's sacrifice. It didn't mention the ambush, the betrayal of bad intel. They sanitized it, Adrian muttered. Rowan's voice was low. Because the truth would have exposed more than they were willing to risk. Contractors, foreign money, deals they didn't want? Public Laura frowned. So they buried the details, and now they're leaking twisted versions to smear him. Rowan nodded. Drake isn't smart enough to orchestrate it. He's just a pawn. But someone higher wants Adrian discredited before he can testify. Adrian closed the folder. His silence was heavier than words. The following morning, the courthouse lawn was unrecognizable. National media had descended. Satellite trucks lined the street, cameras craned high, reporters shouting into microphones with urgent tones. Protesters held signs, "Protect our heroes," across from "No one above the law." Daniel Price wove through the crowd, notebook in hand, his camera swinging from his shoulder. His editor had already run a splashy front-page article painting Adrian as a tragic hero. But Daniel wasn't satisfied. Something about the leaks coming out didn't fit. He spotted Laura slipping through the crowd, flanked by 2 federal officers. He hurried to her side. "Miss!" "Hernandez, off the record?" She shot him a sharp look. "That's what you said last time, and half of it ended up in print." Daniel raised a hand. "I'm not chasing quotes. I'm chasing contradictions. Drake's testimony doesn't match the incident reports, and now these new leaks. Dates, times, they don't add up." Laura slowed. For the first time, her eyes softened slightly. "Then maybe you're looking in the right direction. Just be careful. People get hurt for asking too many questions." That evening, Adrian lay on the narrow cot in his assigned safe-house room. The walls were plain, the air sterile, but it was quiet, too quiet. He closed his eyes, but the silence brought memories roaring back. The firefight, Ellis shouting over the gunfire. The moment Adrian grabbed the hostages, shoving them toward the exit, while Ellis held the line. "Go!" Ellis had barked, his voice fierce, steady, even as bullets ripped the air. Adrian had obeyed, because Ellis gave him no choice. And when the dust settled, Ellis's body lay in the sand, his blood dark against the earth. Adrian had carried him out, but Ellis never made it home. Adrian opened his eyes, the memory still pulsing like a wound. He sat up, pressing a hand to his wrist scar. Sometimes scars didn't fade, they just got quieter. Meanwhile, in a hotel room downtown, Drake's allies gathered. Sheriff Dalton, a thick-set man with a voice like gravel, leaned against the window. Beside him, 2 local councilmen whispered over documents. "We spin it right," Dalton said. "We can make Cross look unstable." "Violent, dangerous." Drake smirked from the bed, still in his jail-issued clothes, but his eyes sharp. "He's not untouchable. Not if people think he's a ticking time bomb. All we need is one slip." "And if he doesn't slip," one councilman asked. Drake's grin widened. "Then we push him until he does." The next day's hearing was unlike any the courthouse had seen. Extra barricades lined the steps. Federal agents screened every entrant. The gallery overflowed with reporters. Adrian sat at the defense table, Laura at his side, Rowan, a silent sentinel behind them. Judge Graves entered, her expression carefully composed, but the tremor in her hand betrayed her unease. The prosecution began with venom, leaning heavily on the leaks. "The defendant is not what he appears. His record overseas is marred by civilian casualties, erratic behavior, and insubordination," Laura shot up. "Objection! These are unverified leaks from anonymous sources." "Overruled," Graves said quickly, though her eyes flicked uneasily toward Rowan. Adrian sat still, his hands clasped, knuckles pale. He'd trained for chaos, for fire and blood, but this was different. This was war without bullets, war of words, perception, control. Rowan leaned forward slightly, his voice low enough only Adrian could hear. "Remember, the truth doesn't always win the first battle, but it always wins the war." Adrian nodded once, his calm returning. Outside, Daniel Price recorded every word, scribbling furiously. But as he compared the prosecution's claims to the documents he'd unearthed, his pulse quickened. They weren't just twisting the truth, they were fabricating. Entire reports cited events that never happened, missions Adrian had never been on. Someone was manufacturing history. Daniel closed his notebook, his decision sharp. If they wanted to bury Adrian under lies, Daniel would start digging for the root, even if it meant putting himself in the crosshairs. That night, Adrian stepped outside the safe house for air, guarded but free under the night sky. The city was quieter here, stars faint above the haze. Rowan joined him, hands clasped behind his back. "You never asked why I came," Rowan said. Adrian glanced at him. You didn't have to. You've always carried the weight for your men. Rowan's expression hardened. It's more than that. Ellis was my godson. The words hit Adrian like a blow. He froze, breath caught. Rowan's gaze was steady, but grief flickered behind his eyes. I trusted you to bring him home, Rowan said quietly, and you did, even if it wasn't alive. I won't let his death be twisted into lies. That's why I'm here. Adrian's throat tightened, but he forced the words out. He saved us all. He made the choice, and I'll carry that until my last day. Rowan nodded slowly. Then carry it with honor. Because this isn't just your fight, it's his too. The storm was only beginning. By dawn, another leak surfaced. This time a video, grainy, showing a firefight overseas. Voices shouted. Dust swirled. The footage ended with a soldier's silhouette dragging someone out of frame. Headlines screamed. Leaked combat video raises questions about Adrian Cross. Commentators debated endlessly. Was it him? Was it doctored? Did it prove heroism or recklessness? The truth no longer mattered. Only perception. And perception was a battlefield Adrian could no longer avoid. The leaked video had already gone viral before sunrise. Cable networks ran it on loop, analysts dissecting every blurred pixel, talk show hosts shouting over one another. Some called it proof of Adrian's heroism. Others framed it as evidence of chaos, recklessness, danger. By the time Adrian walked back into the courthouse, the whispers were different. He was no longer just a defendant. He was a symbol, dragged through the mud and lifted on a pedestal at the same time. Laura Hernandez pushed through the crowd at his side, her jaw tight. This isn't a trial anymore, she muttered. It's a battlefield. Rowan followed close, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. He'd seen too many ambushes to trust a crowd this loud, this divided. Inside, Judge Graves looked more exhausted than ever. Dark circles rimmed her eyes, her robe slightly askew. The leaks, the admiral, the arrests. Her courtroom had become a national circus, and she was no longer sure who was truly in charge. Court is now in session, she said, her gavel striking with less conviction than usual. The prosecution wasted no time. They projected the grainy combat footage onto a screen, letting the echo of gunfire fill the courtroom. This, the attorney declared, is the man we are dealing with. Look closely. Does this look like restraint? Or does it look like a man prone to violence? Laura shot to her feet. Objection! This footage is unauthenticated, context removed. Overruled, Graves said, but her voice wavered. Adrian watched the video in silence. He remembered the mission, though the footage only caught fragments. It had been Ellis's last day alive, his last act of defiance against the odds. The camera froze on a blurred figure dragging a hostage toward safety. Is that you, Mr. Cross? The prosecutor pressed. Adrian met his eyes calmly. Yes. And would you say your behavior here was controlled, disciplined? Adrian's voice didn't waver. I would say 23 people lived because of that day. That's what matters. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Even some skeptics nodded. The prosecutor scowled, shifting papers, searching for another weapon. In the back, Daniel Price scribbled furiously. Something about the video gnawed at him. The metadata, the angles. He'd seen similar footage before, in military archives he wasn't supposed to access. And then it clicked. The video hadn't been leaked. It had been released, intentionally, selectively, clipped to smear Adrian while omitting context. Daniel's pulse quickened. If he could trace the source, he could prove the manipulation. But doing so meant crossing lines that could end his career, or worse. He slipped out of the courtroom, phone already buzzing with encrypted contacts. Meanwhile, Kevin Drake wasn't content to sit quietly in a cell. Thanks to Sheriff Dalton and his allies, he had managed to delay transfer to a federal facility. Now he leaned close to his visitors, his voice low, venomous. They're making Cross into a martyr, he said. We need to change the story. Make him the villain before the feds lock me away. Dalton frowned. The leaks aren't enough. The crowd split. Half think he's a hero. Drake smirked. Then we remind them heroes bleed just like anyone else. His meaning was clear. Dalton hesitated. That's dangerous. Drake's grin widened. So's war. That night, Adrian returned to the safe house, tension crawling under his skin. He sat by the window, watching headlights sweep the street outside. His reflection looked back at him, weary but unbroken. Rowan entered quietly, setting a glass of water on the table. You know what they'll ask next, he said. Adrian nodded. To testify. To pull the whole rotten structure into daylight. And you also know what it means, Rowan said. Once you speak, there's no going back into the shadows. You'll be hunted again. Adrian's jaw tightened. I've been hunted before. Rowan studied him, then spoke softer. Ellis believed in you. He died believing in you. Don't let them erase that. Adrian closed his eyes briefly, Ellis's voice echoing in memory. Go. Get them out. I'll hold the line. When he opened his eyes, resolve had settled. Then we fight in the open. The next morning, the courthouse was surrounded not just by protesters, but by barriers, armed agents, and flashing news vans. The entire town had become a stage. Inside, the gallery was packed tighter than ever. Laura prepared her notes. Daniel slipped back in with his laptop clutched to his chest, and Rowan sat like a sentinel, unreadable. Adrian rose when called. He walked to the witness stand, each step slow, deliberate, heavy with the weight of eyes. Please state your name for the record, Graves said. Adrian Cross, he replied. And your service record? Adrian's gaze swept the room. United States Marine Corps Raider. 15 years, multiple operations across 3 continents, classified engagements, honorable discharge. The prosecutor leaned forward. Mr. Cross, are you aware that leaks suggest misconduct during your service? Adrian's voice cut through. I'm aware that people who profit from silence fear the truth. Gasps rippled. Rowan almost smiled. Then Daniel stood, interrupting, laptop open. Your Honor, I have evidence. The gallery exploded. Graves banged her gavel. Mr. Price, you are not counsel. Rowan rose, voice sharp. Let him speak. Daniel's hands shook as he projected files onto the courtroom screen. Metadata, timestamps, server trails. The so-called leaked video? It wasn't leaked. It was doctored, clipped, and uploaded from an internal government server. Someone wanted it out. Someone wanted Adrian destroyed, the gallery roared. Reporters scrambled to send updates. Graves paled. Order! Order! But order was already gone. In the chaos, a commotion erupted outside. Shouts, the muffled crack of something sharp, gunfire. Rowan's head snapped toward the door. MPs moved instantly, shielding Adrian. Laura froze, eyes wide. The doors burst open. Sheriff Dalton stumbled in, blood streaking his sleeve, eyes wild. He's coming, he gasped. Drake, he's not done. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Before Graves could speak, another explosion of sound erupted outside. Sirens, boots pounding pavement, the crackle of radios. Adrian's pulse steadied. This was no longer just a trial. It was survival. Moments later, Drake stormed into the hall, somehow free of custody, a pistol clutched in his hand. His face was red, twisted with rage, sweat dripping down his brow. This ends now, he shouted, aiming straight at Adrian. The gallery screamed. People ducked, but Adrian didn't flinch. He rose from the witness stand, eyes locking on Drake's. You're out of time, Adrian said, his voice low, but carrying through the chaos. Drake's hand trembled. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. Then Rowan stepped between them, his voice like steel. Drop it, deputy. You're not a soldier. You're just a bully with a badge. Drake's hand shook harder. He glanced at the MPs closing in. Sweat dripped down his temple. And then he fired. The shot cracked, echoing through the chamber. Gasps, screams. When the smoke cleared, Rowan stood tall, the bullet lodged in his shoulder, blood blooming across his uniform. He didn't fall. The MPs tackled Drake, wrenching the gun away, slamming him to the ground. Handcuffs clicked. This time there would be no escape. The room was chaos, reporters shouting, the gallery screaming, Graves frozen, Laura clutching her chest in horror. But Adrian only moved toward Rowan, steady, calm. "You shouldn't have done that," he murmured, gripping the Admiral's good arm. Rowan's lips curved faintly. "Men like us don't get to choose how we protect each other. We just do." Hours later, the courthouse steps were swarmed with cameras, reporters desperate for statements. Adrian stood at the top, Laura and Daniel at his side, Rowan behind him with his arm bandaged. The air was heavy, the world watching. Adrian raised his head, his voice steady. "Today, you saw a man try to twist truth into lies. You saw what happens when corruption hides behind authority, but you also saw people stand up. A judge, a lawyer, a journalist, an admiral, each willing to risk something. That's justice, not headlines, not spin, people willing to stand when it matters." Flashes erupted, shouts overlapped. But Adrian stepped back, refusing to give them more. He had said enough. That night in the safe house, silence settled again. Laura drafted filings, Daniel wrote furiously, Rowan nursed his wound, but Adrian sat by the window, eyes on the horizon. He knew this wasn't over. For every Drake dragged away, there were men in suits pulling strings above him. For every truth exposed, a dozen lies were waiting. But for the first time in years, Adrian felt the weight shift. Not gone, but lighter. Justice wasn't a finish line. It was a battle waged every day by people willing to carry scars and still keep walking. He touched the scar on his wrist, closed his eyes, and whispered to the night, "For you, Ellis." Always far away, in a high-rise office overlooking the Capitol, the man in the tailored suit poured another drink. On his desk lay a classified file stamped with Adrian's name. He smiled thinly. Cross survived today, but tomorrow's another war. He raised the glass in a mock salute to the city below, where lights gleamed like fireflies. The storm was far from over. When you've lived long enough, you learn that justice rarely walks in on its own 2 feet. It has to be dragged into the light, sometimes kicking and screaming. That's what Adrian Cross's story teaches us. Here was a man who'd already given his best years in service to his country, only to find himself sitting in a defendant's chair, accused, doubted, and humiliated. He didn't ask for the spotlight. He didn't want applause or medals. All he wanted was fairness, something so simple but often so fragile. For those of us in our golden years, we've seen the system stumble more than once. We've seen good people crushed by lies, while the wrong folks strutted free. And yet, this story reminds us that truth, no matter how buried, has a way of clawing to the surface when someone, just one person, is brave enough to stand firm. Adrian didn't win that fight because the law suddenly became kind. He won because people, his lawyer, a young reporter, even a seasoned admiral, stood shoulder to shoulder with him. They turned the tide. That's what real justice looks like. Not perfect laws, but ordinary people willing to do the hard thing. If you've lived long enough, you know life is full of unfairness. But Adrian's trial is proof that standing your ground, refusing to lash out in anger, and trusting that calm can be stronger than rage is sometimes the only way to win. Justice isn't handed out. It's earned through courage and through people who refuse to be silent. One of the most powerful images from Adrian's story is the scar on his wrist. He touched it often, sometimes without realizing it. To him, it was a reminder of the day everything almost came apart. The day he lost his closest brother-in-arms, Sergeant Mark Ellis. That scar wasn't just a mark on his skin. It was a doorway into memory, into grief, into survival. If you're in your 60s, 70s, or beyond, you know something about scars. Maybe not from war, but from life. The hip that aches when the weather changes, the surgery scar that took months to heal, or the invisible wounds, grief, loneliness, regrets that sit heavy at night. Every scar has its story, and every one of them whispers the same truth. You made it. Adrian's scar didn't make him weak. It made him disciplined. When Doyle, that arrogant deputy, kicked him under the table, Adrian didn't explode. He didn't shout. He pressed his thumb to that scar, breathed, and remembered that some battles are won by patience, not fists. His restraint was a weapon sharpened by years of carrying scars that could have broken him but didn't. For us, the lesson is plain. We're not defined by what hurt us. We're defined by what we carry forward. A scar means you've been tested. It means you've been hurt, but you kept walking. And sometimes that's enough to inspire others to do the same. So the next time you see your reflection and notice the lines, the aches, the marks of time, remember Adrian. Remember that scars aren't shameful. They are medals, life pinned to your skin for surviving. The final act in Adrian's trial didn't end when the judge banged the gavel. It ended when Admiral Rourke stood up and told the room the truth, that Adrian wasn't just a defendant, he was a decorated Marine raider, a man who had saved 23 lives at the cost of his brothers. The room shifted. People stopped whispering. The lies lost their shine. But truth comes with weight. Adrian knew stepping into the open would make him a target again. He knew powerful men wanted him silenced. And yet he stood. He spoke, not for applause, not for comfort, but because some truths must be carried no matter the cost. For those of us with decades behind us, we've learned how heavy truth can be. Telling your children about mistakes you made, standing up to family when silence would have been easier, admitting regrets even when they hurt, but we've also seen what happens when truth is buried. Families fracture, friendships sour, trust evaporates. Adrian's story reminds us that truth, though heavy, is the only thing that shifts the world. It's the only thing that makes justice possible, that turns scars into stories worth telling. Carrying it may cost us something, friends, comfort, even safety, but carrying it also gives us back something greater, dignity, honor, and the power to light a way forward for the next generation. At our age, we carry more truth than most. Don't bury it, share it. Because sometimes your story is the spark that keeps another person standing tall. When we look at Adrian Cross's journey, we don't just see a courtroom battle, we see the story of America itself, flawed, imperfect, sometimes ugly, but full of men and women who, even when the world leans against them, choose to rise. Justice is never guaranteed, but earned. Scars are not weakness, but survival. Truth is heavy, but it changes the world. If you're 65 or 75, you know these lessons already. You've lived them in your own way. And now, like Adrian, you have the chance to share them, to be the voice that tells the next person, stand, survive, speak. Now that you've walked through Adrian's journey and the lessons it holds, I want to hear from you. Which of these three truths spoke to you most? That justice has to be earned, that scars mean survival, or that truth changes the world? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read your stories and experiences. Don't forget to like this video if it moved you and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us all what really matters. Your voice makes this journey complete.